for our service delivery to evolve, we need to be having autistic voices and perspectives at the table, so that we can be providing the most meaningful services and supports that we can. And so today, again, I have the privilege of introducing our keynote speaker, Kai Forcey Rodriguez. I'm going to read a little bit about Kai before they come up here and get rolling. So Kai is a twice published neurodivergent educator, direct care provider, consultant, and advocate. In their work, they utilize 6 years of professional experience dedicated to fostering inclusive environments that promote neurodiverse empowerment, acceptance, and mental health awareness. Kai holds a master's in education and developmental psychology and education from the University of Toronto, Ontario, Institute for Studies in Education, specializing in autism and well-being practices. Kai has consulted on various accessibility and inclusion projects in the US and Canada, including and not limited to consulted and supported with the creation of the first neuro-inclusive restaurant with sensory room in Toronto called Serene Kitchen, and contributing to its sensory-friendly music album, Breaking Barriers. Kai was featured in the Toronto Star article about the restaurant. Consulting for the Accessible Housing Network Steering Committee in Canada, serving as an advisory board member for Toronto's Accessible Street Art Call. Consulting for Polymorphic Magazine's children's book on autism masking. Additionally, Kai has received multiple recognitions for their work in the past 4 years, including City Year's Excellence in Service Award for 2021, the University of Toronto Star Award 2022, and being one of the runners-up for the Open Skies Rookie of the Year Award in 2024. Kai's superpowers as an autistic person with ADHD are languages, memory, music. Kai speaks English, Spanish, Dutch, Italian, Russian, Hebrew, and Bahasa Indonesia, and plays numerous musical instruments. Kai is mentally sharp, but someone who is intellectually gifted, and known for a fabulous dry sense of humor, as well as someone who strives to embody the lyrics in Sammy Hagar's song, Get to Live from 1987, where he sings, I can sing it. An empty hand reaching out for someone, an empty heart takes a little to fill. It's so much easier to push instead of pull. If you want love, you've got to give them. If you want faith, you just believe them. If you want peace, turn your cheek a little. You've got to give to live. Hear that with their strengths in comforting and authentically being there for people, a love for music, coffee, adventures, and hangouts, the desire to hear other stories to know them on a deeper level, an experience having lived in 6 countries, you found Kai. Their personality, diversified professional experience, and many strengths, major assets of their current role as a peer specialist in the ASD Intensive Route Pilot at Open Sky Community Services. Please give a round of applause for Kai. Thank you so much, Aaron. And thank you all so much for being here today and also having me as well. This is a great honor and privilege. And so without further ado, welcome one and all to peering into the life of Kai. So, as mentioned, my name is Kai Forcey Rodriguez. I go by they, them pronouns, and I'm your host this afternoon. So, who's ready for a very profound philosophical question? Why are we here? Why are we here? So, in my case, I'm here as someone who's from the autistic community. I'm a peer specialist. I'm also that 3-year-old in that photo right there. Who knew that 3-year-old at 29 would be right here with a wonderful, wonderful group of people doing such amazing work here in Massachusetts. So thank you. And I also want to give a quick big shout out to my supervisor here, Stephen Coddington, as well as coming into like prior, and also Chris Loriano, who were a huge part in supporting me throughout the preparation process.
for this presentation, and also my friends on other teams at Open Sky for helping me with the idea mapping process for my talking points today, as well as for everyone at DDS again for having me. Thank you. So key takeaways for today. It's so important in my case to give a huge disclaimer. I'm not here representing the autistic community. I'm representing myself as an autistic individual. I could very easily have a fellow member of my kin standing right next to me disagree with everything I say. We're a very diverse community, and through that, I use core elements of peer support models, which is getting curious about their perspective with genuine curiosity, so I can learn what their worldview is and how I fit in those systems. And if there's any core takeaway, if anyone learns anything from all the things I'll say today, it's that as peer specialists, as people in this field, we're not fixers. We're here to support, collaborate. And no one should see a diagnosis, in my humble opinion, as something to be fixed. So if there's any core takeaway, it's let it be that. So very quickly, our agenda for today is getting curious about the origins at a language kind of level. What comes to your mind regarding the word autism? Another is we're going to talk briefly about misconceptions of autism, and then also what autism is to me, and then as listed here as well, the double empathy problem and so on and so forth. Very exciting topics. So that's our agenda for today. So let's get curious for a moment, very briefly, and feel free to discuss this among your table groups as well. What is, in your own culture, the word autism? Or in the environment that you grew up in, what was autism to you? Or what perceptions were around that? And how potentially could that show up in practice? Or initial thoughts when going in to meet people? So let's take maybe a minute or two to briefly discuss that. Most people don't set out to get so that like a lot of it's like it's not society. You know, like so yeah. That's it. Exactly. The other person behind it, I'm scared for me to not like when I right, he's like 4 hours. Awesome. So, thank you all so much for the great discussions taking place at your tables. Let's wrap them up. Kind of like the rap suite at it. No pun intended, of course. But yes, thank you all so much for joining in tonight. Great discussion, and let's get a little curious further. So here are some, and yes, I'm trying to impersonate Don Knotts in that picture there. But here are some misconceptions about autism, and one of the big ones that I'll highlight here is, first of all, one of my favorites, that autistic people do not have a sense of humor. As you've all noticed, I didn't have a sense of humor. Also, another element that I think is so important to talk about is the impact of applied behavioral analysis and those methodologies on the autistic community. Because a huge part of those experiences, the shared impact of experiences and atrocities, I would argue, that came from the utilization of those methodologies is why my profession exists. That shared lived experience bringing our community together to talk about those stories, to band together. And I think what the reason why it's so problematic is that it focuses heavily on behavioral control. And behavior is communication, period. What are people, it's important for people to get curious about through the behavior, through the experiences that my community is displaying through our behavior, like what we're trying to say to you, what are we trying to accomplish here? And so we can notice those signs. And so that's, as a peer specialist, that's what I do. I get curious through sharing my own experience, but after I hear the story, after I hear the story that's being told about what they're navigating at home, what they're navigating in different programs, at work, if they work, and acknowledging those layers and whether conflict arises because they're overstimulated after a very long day or they're exhausted. Because I know for me personally, like if I'm overstimulated and exhausted, my emotions are sky high and I don't entirely have control over that. And so the focus from those methodologies are behavior modification, which can lead to compartmentalization and further masking, which doesn't help with release and empowerment and acknowledging the person who's right in front of you. So that's why I put there as a misconception that we have to bear in mind. So what is autism to me? Of course, I'm very biased in this, but just as human as anyone else, as well as, in my humble opinion, most brilliant creative minds on earth. We are artists. We are people who think in pictures, to quote Temple Grandin. So that's why we go into so much detail when we're sharing our stories, because at least in my case, I have an eidetic memory. I think like in home movies. And so that's how I describe it. That's my way of communicating. So that's how autism is to me. And then for a little fun, I thought I would add another element with this cool little video of me playing bass. So, thank you. And fun fact, that's all by ear. So that is a combination medley of Spandau Ballet's song "Paint Me Down" and chant number 1, "Don't Need This Pressure On," which came out in 1982. And so as we keep on going, we talk about the double empathy problem. So as defined here, and I'll give a brief definition of it, it's essentially people of the same community understand each other, and people from the outside communities when interacting with people of the same community struggle or don't. However, the caveat there is that the communication breakdowns, per the theory, is not mutually exclusive. And that's something, at least in my experience when I was in undergrad and special ed teaching courses, and also in grad school doing my psych degree, that second part of the theory was omitted. And so I think it's important to bear in mind that how we bridge that is through getting curious, and coming from a genuine place of curiosity. And as a peer specialist, when we're forming the relationships, this theory can be very problematic because we interact with our fellow members of our community with genuine curiosity, learning their story. And if we have the mentality of the how, oh, this is a different person from us, maybe in values, etc., there's no way we can connect with them. That doesn't get us out of the starting gate in forming those relationships. And so that's something really important to keep in mind. Like, I could be someone who's not of my identities, working in a different community, and if I was curious, ask questions about that person's different culture when interacting, then I would be able to understand more. So we have to be mindful of how we think in absolutes when connecting with people. So as we shift gears to autism masking, this is so important to talk about because it's a very real and significant mental health issue in the neurodiverse or autistic community. And a core element of it is the suppression of ourselves or minimizing ourselves so we act like everyone else. So, for example, it can look like me maintaining eye contact with other people or sitting still in my chair without fidgeting. Like, that's what I was taught for years in ABA growing up, that was called appropriate. And so that is a huge part of it. And then there are other settings where we learn how to mask. We learn it from our family cultures, being told by parents, no, you have to act this way. I'm the eldest of three, so I had to act a certain way. And then we also learn that it's something we don't have a choice to do for our own self-preservation. And when we think of it briefly historically, this is not a new concept. When we look at New England's history dating back to the Puritan heritage, as well as what was the cause of the Salem witch trials in 1692, elements of that around looking at people who are different with suspicion. And so this is how over the years, through community trauma and more, this is what we've developed to protect ourselves. And so this is what masking is in a nutshell. And here are some examples as well here, like how does it show up in autistic adults? Like mentioned, forcing eye contact, using a social script before interacting with people, copying others' behavior and social approaches. And then from those examples you can see, I invite curiosity, like, have you seen any of these examples when interacting with folks? And I mean this rhetorically, but something to ponder. And so that's an example of masking. And then here's the result, essentially, as someone who is high masking, in other words, like myself, someone who masks all the time. This message essentially says, when we need help, we're at a breaking point. Listen, please. And thank you. So it's very important. So understanding peer support. What do I do as a profession? So a core part of being a peer specialist is connection, building those relationships. And here we follow the intentional peer support model. And through that, we go from helping to learning together in those relationships as collaborative partners. It's not about you and I, it's about us. And also through that, we go with the core value of mutuality, which is, it's like a professional friendship in that way where both needs are met. The people where we're also honoring self-determination at the same time too, of course, but it's about that relationship that is a two-way street. And also moving towards hope and possibility, because through being a peer specialist, you have the collaborative opportunity for someone who's in the pre-contemplation stage to provide that buy-in and be like, hey, I navigated this. Of course, it wouldn't go in the sequence of conversation, but hey, I navigated this. I know you're in the you may be in a contemplative place. There's a lot of options, but you can meet your goals. I've been there. It's about that shared living experience. It's about that empowerment. It's about that empathy. And that's what peer specialists do. So what does it look like from my perspective? More in depth. So building connections and rapport, and that takes its own course. People come from different life experiences, life situations. And sometimes it means talking to someone through a door for weeks or longer. It means just sitting there in silence, holding space. We're non-directive professionals. And so I've sat for an hour or more just being there and briefly checking in with the person who I'm in, because I read the room, and it's so important to not force conversation if it's not there because of that relationship piece. That's so important. So here are a wide array of examples in practice. So one of them is fostering that relationship where you can tell dad jokes, which is fabulous, may I say, because you get to have fun and as well as go to different places and be like, hey, how do you feel about this place? This is being out in nature, going to a local park. That's a sanctuary place for me because I hear the birds, etc. How is this for you? And getting to know someone in that way. Going to a local library, find those fun spots you can go to where you can incorporate a wide array of different skills that you may be learning outside of peer support too. So, and that's the purpose of being on the pilot program. We're an interdisciplinary team. So, elements of that. So that's what it can look like. So let's put our peer support hats on for a moment. And in here, I believe it's in the conference materials, there is a role play activity, and I decided to title it with a little play on words, bonding over mutual interest in chemistry scenario. A little science joke there. And in that role play, feel free to take a few moments to read it out together and get into the mind of a peer specialist and someone who may be receiving services. So feel free.
We gotta get to back. We have a situation.
We got a situation here. It's a nice. Just put a drop of blood here. Do you think for a DNA scan or? Yeah, that's it.
So maybe this
Let me give everyone a little 4-minute warning. Get through this if that's all right.
we're gonna give them about a 7-minute posting,
Oh, 7, never mind.
just because we want to make sure we can put it up here. That's great. Thank you.
Yes. I joked it was 7-minute warning.
And then you have oh, okay. Yeah. It's this. That's all. Everything's fun. Everything's. You know, is it big enough? Yeah.
There, it's just that there.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Is everything else? I'm but it's fine.
That now would be really. This is more fun. I'm fine. Please don't get. I'm fine. Okay. Thank you so much, I really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you, Tim.
Well, we didn't have any confidence. Chris. Stop.
Chris. Chris. What a Chris.
Yeah. I know. That's about the way the conversation we didn't have.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Let's define a little bit more energetic experience. Yeah. Funny.
Probably for trying to be.
It's very good. Now it's very good.
Oh, right. Yeah.
You say acid, you're not into that. Always. Sorry.
For checking out the role play activity. So, just very quickly, who has some thoughts of what you noticed from your experience looking at the role play activity? Like, how did the interaction seem, or what are some people's thoughts initially? AJ?
The specialist really seemed to meet the person where they were at and acknowledge the small wins. They talked to them when they came into the living room and pointed that out, and then really just focused in on their interest in chemistry and gave them solutions and supported them with being able to carry those out.
Exactly. And that's a huge part of that genuine curiosity that peer specialists start with. That's why we also, when we're about to meet with someone, we start from scratch. So we're learning from that person and their experiences from day one. And so, exactly. Thank you so much. Anyone else? Yes.
Like I said, we weren't trying to fix the situation that we were trying to acknowledge the person was wiring and something. So it sounds like I probably would not if I could fix the relationship at the moment. I'm fixing something now.
Exactly. It's about that relationship care that we do, as well as noticing a situation and being like, hey, I noticed this. I noticed your frustration. Let me know what's going on. Or how does this sit with you? It boils back to that, or it goes back to that leading with wonder and empathy and listening. So thank you all so much for participating in that role play and checking it out. And so here are some wrap-up thoughts that I wanted to share with you all, is what stems from this quote that a friend of mine from Toronto told me. As people, it's not our job to cast judgment on others for their mistakes, but accept and celebrate them for their humanity. And through that, together, everyone in this room, we can collaborate on how to empower autistic folks to be themselves, create the environment where we're comfortable taking appropriate risks to challenge the status quo and move away from what is the cause, in my view, of what leads to autism masking, which is lack of community acceptance. That's where it comes from. And so it's about, as professionals, moving away from the helper mentality and noticing non-judgmentally when we're going to that and taking a step back, while also recognizing our humanity too in those moments where we forget to take that step back and being like, oh geez, I just did this, and verbalizing that. Like, I make a joke with sometimes where I'm like, oh, I guess my car will unlock itself. I need to use the keys when I'm out and about with people, and we talked about that because that's part of being human. And so, so those are the thoughts that I leave you with today. And also, we're not fixers. Thank you. So up here is my contact info, as well as feel free to add me on LinkedIn if you'd like, and I would love to open the floor for any questions y'all may have as well, and I'll do my best to entertain them to the best of my ability. So do we want to pass a microphone around, or
Yes, we can.
how should we do this? Cool, leaving the brave still.
I don't need a microphone, but hi, my name's Lee. I'm a service coordinator supervisor for Charlotte West area. It's nice to meet you. First, I would say thank you for the work you're doing with the RAP program. It's been an amazing resource for us. We're really grateful for people like yourself for supporting that endeavor. I was just curious, what led you to become a peer specialist? Like, what was your, life path that got you to that point?
Yeah, so a main part of it is connecting with my own community. So I've been living in Toronto for about 3 years when I was in grad school, and I knew that my path was leading me back to New England. I grew up in New Hampshire, but I knew it was leading me to Massachusetts, and it related also to my future goal of becoming a clinician who goes from the collaborative model of practice, where we're fostering relationships with people and we're seeing the whole person. Because I feel in my experience growing up as an autistic person, I grew up in the traditional model of care. And I felt that like I wasn't able to explore my own identity. And where we're going about it currently with the way things are going, we're looking at identity, experience, the whole person more. And I wanted to learn specifically how to do that. And being a peer specialist, you can't do a better role than that to learn on that path. Thank you for your question, and also your thanks for what we do. Chris? It's my supervisor.
Hey everyone, hey Kai. It's been, thank you so much for this wonderful presentation. I love that you're talking a lot about what your work is as a peer specialist, as someone who is autistic. I think I can say probably for all of us here that in the DDS world, this is something that we definitely need more of. So I actually have a couple questions, but I'm going to ask this one question as a two-parter. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what peer support looks like in terms of the requirement piece of sharing our lived experiences, because I think something that I think you hit home in different ways in your presentation is that core element of sharing our lived experiences and peer support, and what that support looks like in terms of how it differs from clinical roles. So I'm wondering if part of you could talk about part of that, but then I'm also wondering about what we can do in terms of advocacy for having peer support in DDS, because DMH has been able to do that for the past 20 years or so, and we are definitely behind the curve ball with DDS. So I'm kind of wondering if you can talk about a little bit of those pieces.
Definitely, and thank you for your question, Chris. So looking at the first part of it regarding sharing lived experience, the core way that I go about it is using it as a way to foster hope in the individuals with whom I have a peer support relationship with. So if I have someone, for example, George, who is sharing their own experience and what they're navigating, what I do is I use my own lived experience to not only validate that, however, I make sure I listen first, respond second, and also ask curiosity-based clarifying questions to make sure I'm sharing my lived experience in a similar and related way to what they're sharing with me, so I don't accidentally invalidate what they're saying. And so it's very much related to also knowing the person you're in a relationship with and that curiosity piece. That's where I start from. And then sharing my lived experience, being like, hey, I was in a similar situation. I go in like a vignette style form of storytelling, so very short storytelling form, a brief situation where I experienced that same thing using I language. And then from there, I go into this is how I sought help for this situation, or this is how I navigated it. And then I round off that by saying, how does that sit with you? Is that something you want to do together as part of that collaborative partnership? And they're more than welcome to say no. And that's the thing about this. It's voluntary. The service is voluntary. Because a huge part of the code of ethics for peer specialists is no coercion. We're not directive. So that is a huge piece. The second part is, I think it's so important to get curious about peer models in general, and starting from the basis, like intentional peer support, as we briefly went over today. That could be a great framework to start from as well when we're thinking of what peer support may look like in the future in the context of DDS. And so I think that's where I would recommend that. Also bring the experts to the table, like what you're very kindly doing today, welcoming me here. That's part of that process. And I would happily, if people would like to talk further, I would happily consult to talk more in depth about that or any other elements of neuro empowerment for autistic folks.
I wanted to know, one of the things that I think we've identified in terms of the population is just the abject loneliness as people, move, say, from structured programming situation in schools and then move on to young adults, maybe spend a lot of time on them. And there are providers who are now working towards developing kind of models for socialization, but from your own experience, is there some advice that probably you could give to us as individuals and to the agency, perhaps like a path to follow or a way to engage people as they mature and they're looking for more, day program or, a single social activity?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I would also happily talk more in depth as well about that topic too. But my answer here currently is it goes back to that curiosity piece. Like, as a very diverse community, we can be resistant to day programs because of the stigma that comes from it. We can be resistant to even take the marked bus system, or specific style transit, even PT1, for example, because it's associated with this or that label that we don't want to be part of. So there are a lot of challenges there, but I think that's where the curiosity element comes in of, okay, why is this the case that you feel that these systems that are in place are not suited to you or are an element of a potential barrier as well? And I think for me personally, it really goes back to learning from the person and collaborative problem solving from what they're saying as well. And so that's my short answer, but I would happily converse more about that in depth if you'd like to.
I'm just wondering how you ended up in Toronto to study.
Yeah.
And if you've seen any differences between Canada and the US in the way they approach autism and like services and everything?
Yeah, so what brought me to Toronto was grad school. And I've lived in 6 different countries, so I'm kind of a nomad since I was 12. And I found that I develop more as a person. I grow a lot when I go somewhere else. And you learn from a young age when you have that privilege, and it is a privilege that I acknowledge. You learn that the world is your oyster. And so that's what inspired me to look both at the schools in the US and also in Canada. I got into Canada as well for their master's program in special ed teaching too. And so regarding your question about the differences between US and Canada, I would say when it comes to the academy, the research side of things, Canada is by far ahead of the US when it comes to diversity research. One of my publications is part of it from grad school on autism well-being practices, and it's because 33% of Canadians, if I remember the statistic correctly, are foreign born. And when you have a population of 41 million, that's a significant chunk of your population, and that can inspire a variety of different mindsets. I think too, when it comes to the history and approach around providing supports to the autistic population too, there's a different priority here in the US, I believe. And so when it came to research that I was doing in grad school, and I was looking for autism related research, a lot of it around behavioral research I knew came from the US as an example of that priority. And this is my own experience in that regard. Any last questions? Gotcha.
Do you do any thoughts like in the school system or anything like that? But I feel like a lot of the stigma comes from the school, from because of very young. And I'm speaking as a parent, but I feel like the teacher really needs to learn more coming from someone who actually lives versus just pretending that for great people a story. But I feel like if you coming from someone that experience it on a daily basis. And I say that because my son had about transition, and the response I got after him was he's lived with the back door, he's with all directions. The whole time he just needed the time. That's all he needed was a single. So I think if you don't, I think it would really.
Yeah. First of all, I'm so sorry that happened. I've experienced that in my life as well, and it's agony. I have done talks in schools before and happily speak anywhere and converse with anyone, collaborate with anyone to tag team breaking down any kind of systemic barriers with anyone at any time personally. Because at the end of the day, we're all in this together. We're one Massachusetts community. And so there's no reason why we shouldn't put our brains together to support all communities, especially the ones we serve. So happily, I do that. Awesome. Well, thank you all so much.
Thank you so much. So now you should have gotten an email with the conflict evaluation. I'm told that the email came today or tonight. But open up your phone, your laptop, and please take a few minutes to